lounging, son.
Welcome back to the Comic Lounge. My name's Ryan.
And I'm Manny.
And we are here talking some October themed titles. We had a plan to kind of do like horror, Halloween theme, maybe thriller, I guess you could kind of throw in there. Not necessarily, it doesn't have to be gory or anything like that, but a lot of cool stuff we've kind of planned for the month of October. And we're kicking it off with Locke Key. Welcome to Lovecraft, the Volume 1, Joe Hill, Gabriel Rodriguez. I love this series. I didn't read it when it came out, but when I was at the when I worked at the shop, like my manager, like my buddy over there, was like, just pick it up. So I only took Volume 1 home that time, and I was fucking pissed because I'm like, damn it, dude, I want to just read the next ones. I ended up driving back to my store like after I finished Volume 1, and I just picked up 2 at a time. It's easily one of my favorite things that I've read.
It's amazing, man.
Yeah, it's really good. I mean, the concept is dope. They even did a Sandman tie-in, which like fits so seamlessly. I don't know if you read that one, but
I haven't read it. I only read the first volume back when it first came out, and I mean I loved it. But then I think right after that, I kind of like stepped away from reading comics for a bit, and like I was moving and stuff, so I didn't stay current. But when you mentioned this is a possible title for spooky season,
are you telling me you haven't read the rest?
No.
Oh my god, dude, I'm kind of jealous that you're experiencing it for the first time. It's amazing, dude. I had
read, from what I remembered, I had read the entirety of Volume 1, and I think I had started Volume 2, the Head Games, because I remember some of the concepts in that. But for those of you who haven't read it, Locke and Key is about a family that the patriarch, the dad, named is it Rendell?
Mm-hmm.
Rendell Locke, I think. He's a guidance counselor. He gets murdered by one of his students, and the family then moves back to the old family house, which is in Massachusetts, in a town called Lovecraft.
So dope. Such a great name. Yeah, Lovecraft, and it's called the Keyhouse. And I think it's brilliant to have the house where the Locke family lives, because it's like an ancestral home. I really have to be careful not to spoil anything for you. It's called the Keyhouse, and there's all these different keys. Obviously, like if you look at the cover of every single trait, like it's going to have a different key on there, and each one represents something, and it does
something.
It doesn't.
He has a magical quality of it, or
right. So it doesn't need to go to a specific door either, which is kind of interesting too. And so the way this book opens up, and I have to say, first of all, like Joe Hill, if you don't know who he is, fantastic writer, but he also comes from one of the greatest writers I think that has ever fucking put pen to paper, fucking
I agree,
fingers to keyboards.
My favorite writer,
author, Stephen King.
King, Joe Hill is his son.
It's and I love that he's not making a name for himself using his dad's name, and he's an amazing writer, dude. He obviously loves the comic books, because I think this is his first comic. I could be completely wrong. Okay. It's just from the get-go, dude. The pacing of it, the writing of it, all these different things that are happening within the story, the characters already, like within the first issue, like they feel very fleshed out. And like I can imagine, like coming from being a novelist, right? Like you're writing very differently when you're writing just with yourself, and you're not writing for an artist. And like I would love to see his scripts, because I feel like
I was gonna say the same thing. I would love to see the script, because to me, like reading this, Joe Hill could have easily just been a comic book writer and been successful, because that's how fucking good this book is. You know what I mean? Like, and very rarely do you see a writer that excels at both. I mean, we've had plenty of novelists that dabble in comics. That's not new. Mm-hmm. But to me, it's just like how he is almost a perfect comic book writer, man. I mean, the pacing in this book, like you said, is amazing.
Yeah.
I mean, it will keep you turning pages after pages after pages. You're not going to be able to put it down. The characters are very well fleshed out. And, that probably does come from being a novelist, where you spend so much time writing like the interior monologue of characters, probably. So I'm sure he brought that kind of skill set to it. If he had decided to just be a comic writer based on the strength of this book alone, and like a couple of other things I read from Joe Hill, he would have been fine. And then you add in Gabriel Rodriguez's art, which is also phenomenal. I mean, there's so many great things in this book that I wanted to point out, like his
Yeah, and
use of like
he
repeating images and slightly changing something in it to like show the passage of time, or like how slow time is moving in certain parts because people are going through grief. I mean, this is like A-list material from the top to the bottom, man. This is a fantastic comic, and like you said, it's probably one of the best books out there.
yeah, I mean, and the kids like, Tyler,
Bodhi, Kinsey, that's right, yeah.
all each of them is like a very different type of like person, right? Like Tyler is more the jock type of character,
Yeah.
right? Bodhi's like just this annoying little kid who like he's the one that kind of discovers, he's the first one we see use the key. And
Mm-hmm.
I like the kind of cold open that we get with
Yes.
first of all, what a great opening page, right? Like you just see this fucking door with a welcome mat. Then you see the two kids. One of them is one of the students that the guidance count Rendell sees
Was
at yeah, sees at the in the office or whatever, but we don't
Yeah.
know that yet, right? Like we start seeing it, but you see one of them has an axe, one of them has a gun, and they're like, oh yeah, my uncle lives around here. And then you flash out, and this is where you see shit really fucked up, like the dead bodies in the back of the truck, right?
Yeah, that's
And
what I was saying about the pacing. It's just like it's like they are very careful to make the page turn such an important part of reading the story, and like
Mhm.
it's you could tell that these the writing team and the art team are just working in tandem and creating like something that just flows. I mean, like you said, from like the second page, you're in fully on the story.
Yeah, and then you get the kids, they're all outside, and then fucking you flash to the dude with the axe, right? And then you're at the funeral. And you
Yeah.
go back and forth, and like, you start to see like why this all went down. And obviously, like, I mean, I've never said it, but in passing, Tyler mentions like, oh yeah, if you kill your dad, kill mine too, right? And
Yeah.
that's Sam Lesser, who's one of the guys. He's kind of
Mhm.
like the nerdy one. He doesn't look as much of like a hick like the other one does to me. But yeah, so like that's what kind of set this in motion, or so you're led to believe. And
Yeah.
then you start to figure out why he's really going
Yeah,
over
and I
there,
mean,
right?
it's part of the pleasure is discovering the plot as it unfolds. So, like, I mean, I think that's why we don't want to talk about it too much. But
Yeah.
I think what we can say is that the murder that Sam commits is related to something about Keyhouse and is related to the keys and something like in a lot of horror stories, it always goes to the past and like and a big theme in horror. I mean, it's there in Nightmare on Elm Street and other horror stories is like the sins of like the father or the parent being passed down to the son and like the next generation having to pay for something that maybe happened in the past and that starts creeping its head in here too. So
Yeah.
there's a lot of mythology that's being created and it's being created very slowly, so it feels very organic and it feels like really really awesome when you're reading it. Like you're getting all this information through the dialogue, through like little visual cues, and like it all just kind of builds inside your head, and before you know it you have like all this in your head and it's like, wow, holy shit, they got all this like going, and you don't even feel like you're being info dumped or like being having exposition done. It's just great writing, man, and the art, like I said, is beautiful.
You know what though? It's almost unnerving because he has more of a cartoony style in this, and
Yes.
his art does change like later. And obviously, like if you look at some of his more recent stuff, his art has definitely evolved from what this is here. But like this like exaggerated look to the way people feel, like the dad,
Yeah.
even like he has this like nobody really looks like that with that big chunky like kind of head, but and then
Yeah.
Sam Lesser, like he's got really like almost like misshapen he kind of looks.
Yeah,
but
there is a lot of cartooning, like as opposed to just comic book art. I
but
mean, I think
my
there's a difference.
but my god, dude, there's gore in this book too, like, and I
Oh, dude,
think
and it, like
that
you said, it makes it so much more visceral to see it when
yeah,
it's drawn this way. Like,
yeah, it's gory in the sense that, well, you're seeing a bunch of dead people and fucking, like people are getting slashed and stuff like that, but it doesn't feel gory in the sense that you're like, oh, that's disgusting. It's unnerving, because you're
Yeah,
like
yeah, it's not
they
like torture porn stuff,
yeah
or even like stuff like in Red Room, where it's like, like just meant to push the envelope
yeah
in the extreme. It's just your standard horror movie, like like crime violence. But like you said, because of the nature of Rodriguez's art being so cartoony, like that carries over to the violence. So it's like it's gonna be like much more expressive, and
yeah.
and that much more shocking when you see it happen.
Yeah, and I have to say too, because they kind of it happens off camera, but like not only does their dad die, because the kids are really the focal point of this book. I mean,
Yes, yeah.
that's who the main characters are, and they will continue to be that. Yes, the mom is still there. You have
And the
the
uncle.
Uncle Duncan comes in. You just watch the progression of them and how each one of them is dealing with their grief in a much different way. And the mom, something happens to her that we don't see, but it's implied. And then she just becomes this drunk, and she's like not even there for her kids, like, so
Yeah.
she's kind of absent. I mean, we see her in the book, but we don't see her a lot,
Yeah.
and
And
I'm gonna be try to be careful, because like, look, yes, this book has been out for 15 years, but you know what,
and there's a TV show
and
too,
there's a TV show,
which
but
I
you know
haven't
what,
seen.
dude, you can still experience something that's old for the first time without being spoiled, you know what I mean, like
Yeah, and you
there's
should have that chance, because that's
yeah.
it's part of the pleasure.
Exactly, but I definitely like I just we had to spotlight this book because it is like, to me, it's one of the best original concepts that I've seen in
Hmm.
in a very long time. I think since this book has come out, I can't point to like
There's
one
nothing
book
like it, man.
yeah, there's nothing, and there still hasn't been anything like it. And I think that
No.
what you're in for, and what anybody else, if you're listening or watching this and you plan to pick this book up, what this series becomes is nothing like what you would expect after reading volume one. And like I said, there's a two-part Sandman Locke Key crossover that's just like, it doesn't even feel forced. It feels like, oh, this fits within the tapestry of both, and connected it in such a seamless way that you're
Yeah,
like,
because
makes sense.
Joe Hill has a line of horror comics at DC, so like that's right. I
Well, he
mean,
did. He
he did.
did.
Yeah,
I don't know if
yeah, he
he's
did.
still doing it, but he did like the Hill House stuff over
The
there.
Hill
Yeah.
House stuff. Yeah,
And
so
I know they still do a little bit of DC horror. I just read I mean, this is not connected, but the Sergeant Rock Bruce Campbell book.
yeah,
I just
Army
read
of
that.
Darkness.
That book was awesome.
Yeah, I have some of the issues. I just never finished buying the run, but
Really good. Yeah, I read it in one sitting yesterday. But Joe Hill and Gabriel Rodriguez, it's the pairing of them. It just, like, from the get-go, like, you can't create that good of a first issue without having really good chemistry creatively.
yeah,
And it seems like they had it from like the minute they met. And I'm sure there's interviews, I'm sure there's stuff like that I could go back and, or we could go back and read. And I'm sure they've talked about their working relationship and how the book came together. And I feel like I might have read something in the afterword in one of the trades. I can't remember exactly, but it's just, this is really lightning in a bottle, and it's clear to see why this book has such a lasting power, still continues to sell. And obviously we talked about the keys, but I love when we see the first key used, and it's Bodhi, and it's the black key, which is on the cover, and he goes through a door, and he just drops dead,
yeah,
and you're
yeah. The
just
first
like,
key turns you into a ghost. Yeah,
yeah, and
it's like
you're like, what the fuck? And then he's like floating over himself, because they recently did a 15th anniversary issue of Lock and Key reissue, but it had a different ending. And that one, Bodhi just dies. It just doesn't, and that's it. He's gone. He's not alive anymore. But it's funny to see that, because then you're like, okay, what's going on? And then as you see that there's more keys, then your mind starts going. At least for me, I'm like, okay, well, what are these other keys? And then they mention some, and you're like, well, what do those do? And
yeah,
there's so many, like you talked about volume two being mind games, obviously it's referring to a key that's found in this issue. And then you, without spoiling too much too, it's like, because it is an ancestral thing, it is like, passed down from generation to generation for this key house. These keys have a long history within the Locke family. You find out that only certain members of the family, you have to be of a certain age
Yeah,
That's what it is, to know. And it's
yeah,
almost like you forget as you get older. And I like that
yeah.
because
That's
it
why
kind
the
of,
mom has trouble seeing certain things that the kids are like, you didn't just, you know what I mean? I don't want to spoil the specific
yeah,
moment, but like, there's a pretty crazy moment where like anybody would freak out and the mom doesn't, and
yeah,
then that's when you realize, and things that are said that like, especially I think Dodge. I mean, we haven't mentioned Dodge. He's like the villain of the piece. But the less you know about him going into it, the better. Just know that there is an otherworldly villain in here, but again, not what you expect. And there's a lot of twists and turns with that
yeah.
character too.
And there's a
But
reason he doesn't like the Locke family too. You can't
yeah,
forget that, like, I
yeah,
mean, what,
there's a
what,
lot going on, and like this is such a great first volume because it sets up all the pieces, and it ends in a way where like I mean I had to jump right into the second volume, like literally right away because I was so engrossed by what I was reading, and it's great. And it's like you look at this and like it's as rich and layered as a novel, and you're like, okay, well, like maybe it could have been, but like it's so brilliant that it's a comic book because like it's comics and novels are different beasts when it comes to telling stories, and I think this just works well as a comic because like you want the visual of what each key does,
yeah.
So like that's what's really cool. And Gabriel Rodriguez is great at drawing that, and like you said, the cartooning, the expressions on the faces. I can't sing praises for this comic enough, man. I mean, I think it's one that everyone should have on their shelf. If you're even just casually interested in comics, probably a good title to jump into. It's really very accessible.
This to me is
Like
like if you have somebody that's like a fan of, I know I already mentioned it, but if a fan of Sandman, to me it's like one of those titles where
yeah,
it can
very
lure in.
Vertigo. If you like Vertigo stuff, you probably would like this too.
Yeah, it's just fantastic, dude. And like it's one of those series where you benefit from reading it more than once because like
Hmm.
knowing what happens, like going back, I'm like, oh shit, I didn't. I mean, I wouldn't have known that that was an Easter egg the first time I read it because it doesn't. You don't find out till later, but like, oh shit, they showed that early on in the series, that early on in the first volume, and then it plays out a couple issues later.
Yeah, there's definitely like a lot of seeds planted that I know are going to deliver.
Yeah,
And it's just amazing to me how, I mean, Joe Hill must have really thought about this story for so many years because like it's so intricate, so well thought out. Like you said, each character has such a distinct personality that any one of these characters could be the main character, and they kind of all are the main character at one point.
yeah,
And and it's just great, man. I mean, Joe Hill's a fantastic writer, and I'm gonna read the rest of the series that I never finished, and I can't wait to do so, man. It's fucking great stuff, man. And definitely a great book to read for the Halloween season because you got the creepy house, you
yeah,
got the Northeast setting, so there's some Stephen King tropes in there too. So if you're a Stephen King fan, not that Joe Hill is cribbing from his father, but like obviously he's gonna be influenced by his father. How could he
yeah.
not be? So there's elements of what makes King so good in there, and King's great at character development too. So you could tell that Joe Hill inherited that too. But just the setting is great, the atmosphere is great, the character development is great, the art is great. I mean, this is a 10 out of 10 book,
Yeah,
man.
to me, this is a flawless book, and it's not often
Yeah.
that I can say that it's flawless, but the concept is amazing. It leaves you wanting more after each issue to the point where like you can't just read one issue. You have to at least read like two or three. For me, like I read because I started it late at night and I was like, I read the first issue. I'm like, I gotta read the second one. I gotta at least read one more. I can't go to
Mhm.
sleep on this ending, But it's just like fast paced. It's so intricate in terms of like all the different, like I said, the different plates spinning with the different characters and what their different motivations are for why they do what they do. I love that Bodhi is kind of like nobody believes him. He's the one that discovers the key and like he
Mhm.
tries to tell and like then his siblings start to realize, oh shit, maybe he's not lying, because how else would he know this particular piece of information unless that really did happen what he said. And just I love books not set in like a big metropolitan area where it's like it
Yeah.
is like this made up small town. So it's kind of separate from the world. So it doesn't really have all these other things coming at you. And while it does, they were from a different town now that they're back home. Like it's
Yeah.
different. I love the design of the house and just like the keys and the ideas behind what each key does and the design of each key like is awesome. I mean, I know that they made actual keys and they were selling them, which is kind of
Oh,
cool.
nice.
But this is by far one of my favorite titles that I've I'll say discovered over the last like couple of years. I think it's
Mhm.
about, it was right before the show, and I can't even, I guess is
Yeah.
that before pandemic? That is, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah, time has flown. So I guess it's been like about 4 years since I've read this book, but
Right.
so
Well,
good.
damn.
Yeah, so good. I highly recommend it. And like Manny said, you won't want to stop. So I mean, they got a nice slipcase that you can get all 6 volumes. You can read it digitally. It's a very easy book to find. It's not hard at
Yeah,
all.
it's everywhere. I mean, you can find it in most major bookstores. I think it's a book that just sells, and it does attract, many readers. And you don't have to be a comic book fan, it's got its own mythology it's building. So if you want to, read a comic and you're not a comic book person, like you could easily get into this, man, and love it.
Totally, dude. Yeah. So go out there, go pick it up. Make sure you stick with us for October. We got a lot of cool stuff. I know Manny
Yeah,
and I
man,
are going
lots
to
of
do.
horror comics we're talking about.
Yeah, Manny and I are going to do some stuff. I got a few in the works too that I did by myself, but a lot of cool content that we planned for October. So like, follow, subscribe, hit the bell icon so you're notified every time a new vid drops. And on that note, we're out.